Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's APN webinar. Thank you for joining us. For those of you who are regulars, you know this is the moment where I participate in the time-honored Washington tradition of filibustering, because it takes a moment for everybody to get into the Zoom room. So hello, I'm Hadar Suskind. I'm the president and CEO of Americans for Peace Now. We are very glad to have you with us. We're going to give this just another moment as I watch the participant count keep rising, and then I will go ahead and introduce my colleague and our guest today, and we will get started. So thank you for being with us. Let's see, how are we doing? Okay, here we go. Let's get it rolling. So hello once again, everyone. I'm Hadar Suskind. I'm the president and CEO of Americans for Peace Now. Thank you for being with us for this webinar today. Before we introduce everyone and dig into the content, just a little bit of the housekeeping. So as always, this webinar will be recorded, and we will share the recording afterward. So if you want to share it with friends and family or watch it again because it's so much fun, whatever you want, that will be available. I remind you that if you would like to ask a question, you need to use the Q&A button at the bottom, not the hand raise. Use the Q&A. Please type in your question, keep it short and succinct, and we will get to as many as possible and answer as many as possible. I am, again, glad to have you all with us here today. We've got a really important topic to talk about, and a great guest joining us for the moment from inside his car, but that will change soon. And you know, before we move on to the guests, I just want to say a few words about this. Obviously, the situation in Gaza right now changed on October 7th and in the days following for obvious reasons that we'll of course touch on. But the crisis in Gaza did not start on October 7th, just as the Israeli-Palestinian conflict most certainly did not. So we are going to hear from our guest about the current situation in Gaza and UNRWA's work there, but also some of the background and some of what led to this point in terms of Gaza. Again, to be clear, the purpose of this webinar and this particular discussion is for us to hear and learn about UNRWA's work in Gaza. We all know that this is taking place under the broader context of the Hamas attacks on the 7th, under the broader context of the conflict since then and before then. So we're going to try to keep our conversation focused on the now and on UNRWA and its work in Gaza. And I would ask that you keep the questions focused on that front as well. So with that, I will say hello to Madeline Cheragino, our Director of Government Relations, and my co-host for today. Hello, Madeline.
Hello, thank you so much, and thank you all for joining. We're very fortunate to have us here with us, Bill Deere, the Director of the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees in the Near East, or as most of us know the organization, UNRWA. He's the Director of their Washington Representative Office here in DC. And thank you so much for joining us, Bill. He's going to be giving us a picture of what's happening and the humanitarian situation on the ground. So before we jump into discussing the current crisis, as Hadar mentioned, the situation in Gaza did not start after the 7th. So Bill, would you mind telling us a little bit about UNRWA, its mandate, where it conducts its work, and the scope of its work?
Absolutely. And first, Madeline, Hadar, I want to say thank you for having me on. And apologize to the viewership for about another 15 seconds. I'm driving a car, as life has a way of getting in the way, coming back from eye surgery. So, having said that, UNRWA has actually been around since 1949. Its mission, its boss, as it were, is the United Nations General Assembly. They're the folks who give us our mandate. Unlike some things in Washington, we do not have a permanent mandate. The mission of UNRWA has to be renewed every 3 years or so by the General Assembly. And the mission is to provide humanitarian and human development services to Palestine refugees until there is a settlement to the bigger questions in the region. Now, maybe in retrospect, because we're often, one of the first questions we often get is, Bill, why isn't this done by the UN High Commission on Refugees? And I think the answer is, in retrospect, no one expected us to be around in 1949 as a permanent organization. So we have 5 operating fields, Gaza, as you know, but also the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon. We have what makes us, Madeline, unique in the UN family is we're what's called a direct service provider. So in other words, we don't write a check to another organization. We run a school system of our own. We run a primary health network of our own, and we provide social services. So contributions to UNRWA do not go through any governmental organizations. They go directly to Palestine refugees. And in fact, we have 30,000 employees. And of those 30,000 employees, all but about 200 of them are Palestine refugees themselves. So to shift our focus to our largest field, if it's okay with you, Gaza is the largest field for UNRWA. We have a school system for 300,000 girls and boys through 9th grade, age 14. We have a network of 22 primary health centers throughout Gaza. And we run a food assistance network this is all prior to October 7th, for 1.2 million Palestine refugees. And between our 1.2 million people that we support, plus 300,000 people that were supported by the World Food Program, even before October 7th, 3 out of 4 Gaza residents were receiving food assistance. And that was, so in other words, 3 out of 4 Gazans were receiving about half of their calorific need through either the UN program, UNRWA's program, or the World Food Program. So it's a big operation. And probably to take a guess at your next question, that's why we are the linchpin at the moment of humanitarian response in Gaza. We have 13,000 employees. We have a network of schools. We have a network of warehouses. We actually were responsible for the importation of 60% of the food commodities into Gaza before October 7th. So that's in essence why we've become so critical to what's going on there.
Thank you, Bill. Sticking with the pre-October 7th for a moment, Gaza was already under a blockade prior to the attacks and the subsequent war. Could you describe for us what the humanitarian situation looked like before this crisis?
Certainly, it's life there was not and is not a pleasant thing. Like I said, 3 out of 4 citizens of Gaza required food assistance from the international community. Over half of Gaza is or was unemployed, and given when you break that down a little further, what you discover is that youth unemployment in Gaza was between 70 and 90%. So it's having visited there myself, there's some certain things about it that you read about, but sometimes you really just have to experience. And I'll give you an example. Power might only be 8, 12 hours a day. But what you don't appreciate until you get there is that means there's no traffic lights. There's no street lights. Any nights at light are from generators in buildings. And I always joke that the toughest job at UNRWA were the drivers, because they had me going around Gaza looking at the various extent of our operation, Madeline, and I'm tapping the imaginary brake every 5 feet. But I would also say that Gaza drivers are actually much better behaved and mannered than you will find on 16th Street in Washington, headed inbound every day at rush hour.
Thanks, Bill. You know, this is obviously for everyone involved in this issue at all. It's been a very difficult 2 months. I appreciate finding a small little spot of humor. So thank you. Let's talk about the current situation. Tell us, you know, what is UNRWA facing when it comes to the evacuation of so many people from the north to the south in Gaza, the blockade, the bombings, all of the issues, and tell us some about what UNRWA is doing to address the needs of the Gazans now.
Hadar, it is, you know, just speaking personally, or I shouldn't say speaking personally, I take my cue from the Commissioner General of UNRWA, who is a deeply experienced humanitarian serving all over the world in previous posts. He has been back into Gaza now twice since the war commenced, and when he's startled, I'm startled. He compared it to Rwanda, his experience in Rwanda. So basically, believe it or not, so this is not our first rodeo in conflict zones. The last major one was 2014. So we have plans for dealing with it. For example, many of our schools are also designated as emergency shelters, for example, so that in a conflict, there's specially pre-positioned goods there. We budgeted, you know, our plans budgeted for 350,000 people all over Gaza. Well, what do you do when you're now housing 1.1 million people? And very few of them in the north, they're not geographically spread anymore because of the um, evacuation, migration, however we want to call it, to the south. They are in roughly 100 or so facilities in the south. Of that 1.1 million, I think we'd estimate about 125 to maybe 200,000 stayed in the north at UNRWA facilities in the north. So the conditions are horrific. The Commissioner General spoke very movingly the other day. You know, family on 4 square meters of concrete is their living space. People who haven't been able to change clothes since they evacuated the north, for example. It's you know, there's a lack of water, lack of medicine. You might have seen reports the other day from the head of the World Health Organization that unless there is a radical infusion of medicine and other humanitarian supplies, we're going to start seeing deaths that have absolutely nothing to do with conflict, but everything to do with disease. And it's just something that we're tracking very closely. You know, fuel is everything there. Because the aquifer is salt water, you have to literally purify and desalinate the water before it can be used or becomes potable. I mean, these, you know, we're trying to get some restoration of the water system, other utilities, I mean, humanitarian supplies. There's just not enough of anything that's coming in right now. There was allowance of cooking gas into the zone. It developed into a 2-kilometer line of people trying to get cooking gas. It's just horrific things, big and small, along those lines, Hadar. I mean, how do you you know, how do you like act, how do you put this into words? And in fact, what I would suggest, and I think I saw something at the bottom from one of the troops, and they're absolutely right. If you go to our social media on X or whatever they call themselves this week, you will see reports. You will see what's going on. So, for example, Tom White, who is our Gaza field director, filmed part of his. He led the initial convoy north at the start of the pause. You know, watch the video of what it's like to drive through, you know, drive through Gaza. And, you know, what folks have told me, my colleagues have told me, is that there's no longer a frame of reference for places that they had, you know, routinely marked their way with. I mean, it's gone. Um, it's been a harrowing situation from the start. We, for the first time in 75 years, had to evacuate our headquarters in North Gaza um, the night before, because our headquarters is right across the street from a university. It took major airstrikes. And when you saw our headquarters afterwards, it was a distinction without a difference. And just speaking, you know, uh, in of an example of how American assistance helps in great ways and small, 60 of my colleagues are still alive because the night of those airstrikes on the university across from our headquarters, they were able to shelter in a hardened facility on the headquarters ground that had been hardened thanks to funding from the United States. I mean, I just, whether you go to our social media site, UNRWA.org, we put out situation reports uh, daily, if not more than daily, for folks to really, but it's the best possible way to actually experience what's going on. Because frankly, Hadar, I don't think that I can really give you um, the words to really, you know, bring this, you know, to share this. I mean, we've now lost 110 of our colleagues, and this is um, again. I just go back to my colleague Tom White. Um, my goodness, you know, this is his 11th conflict zone, and even he is just mortified by the intensity of the destruction, and he obviously the loss of life. And you know, for the UN, we've never lost this many people before in such a short time. It's um, you know, I could just go on. Our Khan Yunis Training Center, it's a vocational school. You know, we have tens of thousands of people there sheltering now. Anywhere, you know, anywhere there's a blue flag, people are flocking to it for protection. But the fact has been also, sadly, that um, the blue flag doesn't make you necessarily. We don't see anywhere at the moment that's particularly safe in Gaza up until the pause, as our facilities have been damaged. Can't tell you who. I mean, that's the kind of thing, frankly, you investigate after the fact. But you know, we've lost staff, we've lost displaced folks from strikes at or near our facilities.
Thank you, Bill. I'm going to continue along that kind of subject line. You mentioned that the vast majority of UNRWA staff are refugees themselves. Can you talk a bit more about what that's like for people working for UNRWA who are also, you know, going through this crisis personally and watching their family members at risk, and what?
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, Madeline, simply put, these people are my colleagues in Gaza are the real heroes here. So as I mentioned at the outset here, we have 13,000 employees. About 3,000 of them are actively working at the shelters every day. And many of them are displaced now themselves. And you know what's the old lie? They're not just, you know, they're not just helping, they're customers. And they can you imagine a person's sense of duty that they will actually send you a note saying they're going to be a little late because you know, because it was just hard to get to their duty station that day because of activity the night before. You know, we had one of our staff down at our Rafah crossing came to work the next day. You know, he lost his granddaughter the night before, but they're there. They're doing the job every day. And I absolutely agree with my colleague, Tom White. These are the heroes of UNRWA, who, you know, under enormous pressure, under enormous family strain, still keep showing up every day doing their job.
Thanks, Bill. I want to look forward a little bit. You know, the current pause is evidently still on, although, you know, it's had its challenges as well. But the discussion is that if this pause, ceasefire, whatever folks would like to call it, does come to an end, that Israel will be moving the military offensive to the southern part of the Strip, the area to which so many people were told and have evacuated. Does UNRWA have plans for its operations, for your operations, if that happens? The establishment of safe zones, other steps you are considering?
Well, Hadar, once again, and you know, this is why you lead the organization, my friend. You get right to the heart of the issue. No one really knows what's going to happen next. From the Secretary General to the Commissioner General, we have everyone has called for respect for international humanitarian law, and in particular, respect for UN facilities that are under privileges and immunities supposed to be protected in times of conflict. As I mentioned, we have had facilities either close calls or direct hits. And so, of course, it is of the gravest concern to us that, and the top priority would be, if the pause comes to an end, that they have to respect international, both sides, to be clear here, because I'm not both sides. I work for the UN. I don't work for one side or the other. Both sides have to respect international humanitarian law, and they have to respect the privileges and immunities of UN facilities. That's the only way we're going to be able to protect people. Now, to your other, you know, really good point, you talked about safe zones. The UN is not supportive of the safe zone concept, and for folks who are old enough to remember, you know, the UN will never look at safe zones with particularly good eye ever again after Srebrenica. But you know, the area that had been proposed to be a safe zone was, in the words of my Gaza field director, marginal agricultural land and sand dunes. There's no infrastructure there, and you know, the idea of moving at a minimum hundreds of thousands of people, if not a million or more, to an area that is not set up to receive them would be nothing short of a disaster. And I mean, there's no, you know, there's the concept, but there's nothing behind the concept, Hadar. You know, who's going to set it up? I mean, what are we going to do with all this? Can you really do tents? It's, you know, winter isn't coming. Winter is there. In fact, if viewers go to our social media site, you'll see one post from one of my colleagues who is living in their car. And there's video of him living in his car during a rainstorm last week. And this is where, you know, to circle back a little bit, Hadar, this is where the real concern over health starts. So there's not enough power to pump the sewage. You know, there's not enough fresh water. You're going to start seeing waterborne diseases as a result. And you know, our call is not for safe zones. Our call is to respect international humanitarian law, respect the sanctity of the blue flag. And just, you know, in case folks wonder how things work there, do know this: UNRWA doesn't, you know, an UNRWA, when a truck arrives at Rafah crossing, okay, it's met by an UNRWA forklift, which transfers the goods to an UNRWA truck, which in turn delivers it to the warehouses. And then working with our sister agencies, we decide where things need to go. And, you know, it's a snapshot. You're working from moment to moment on what is the highest priority of the moment. But please understand, you don't just drive around South Gaza, let alone North Gaza, without permission from the Israeli defense personnel. Every movement is coordinated. And if I can, let me just tell you, let me just give you a story about just how closely things are watched. So within the first few days at the crossing, some things came in through the crossing, not on pallets, which meant basically it took forever to tranship the stuff onto UNRWA trucks. So basically, the decision was made, even though it was 3 o'clock in the morning, that we're going to go and take the stuff to the warehouses. So there's a convoy in pitch dark, bombed out area, and they hit a roundabout, and 3 of the trucks take the wrong turn at the roundabout. We had the IDF on our phone within 30 seconds telling us that what's this? Where are they going? If you don't get it back on track, we're going to hit them. So the idea that things aren't coordinated, that I mean, you just can't move around there without coordination. And similarly, Hadar, every UNRWA facility is what we call deconflicted. In other words, the IDF and the combatants on the other side know exactly where all our facilities are. And it's actually updated on a daily basis. So there's really no, you can't claim you didn't know, because, both sides are provided the location of these facilities, and it's updated daily.
Thanks, Bill. But before I hand it back to Madeline, I just want to flag 2 things off of what you said. One, you've talked about whether it would be hundreds of thousands of people or 1 million people, 1.1 million who've moved. Those
who've already moved before, many of them, right?
Right. Many on the webinar know, Madeline and I are both in the DC area. The entirety of Washington, DC is about 600,000 people. So, I mean, we're talking about almost twice as many people who live in all of Washington, DC, moving from north to south, or needing to move again, as the case may be, or other things, just for some perspective.
And a little Gaza geography. The South is not nearly as developed as the North. I mean, so it's not just that they moved south, it is that they moved into an area that's really not as developed as the northern part of the Strip.
Yeah. And the other thing I want to add, one, just because people may have missed it at the beginning, but also I'm seeing some comments to this extent. We, over the last many weeks now, of course, have talked about this current crisis and the war between Hamas and Israel in many different contexts, in many different ways. This conversation is focused on Gaza and on the situation in Gaza and what UNRWA's role is there in helping alleviate the humanitarian crisis. So if anyone wants to know why we're not talking about the attacks of the 7th, or we're not talking about all the horrible different things that Hamas has done, it's because we have talked about those many times, and we will continue to do so. And this conversation is focused on a specific piece. So again,